Hello, my name is Hannah Hooper, and this is the conflict management presentation. Starting with a quick overview, we'll be going over the roots of conflict, how to address it, conflict on the mission field, and then some reflection questions. The perspective for this whole presentation will be coming from conflict on the mission field. Starting with some roots, distrust is really the foundational fracture within conflict on teams. If you don't trust somebody, it's really hard to be vulnerable. And so when you have conflict, it requires vulnerability. So the fear of conflict, people will cower away. They won't address things that need to be addressed. Lack of commitment to one another is also a big root in conflict. If you don't commit to one another, especially on the field, it makes it really difficult to move forward, especially in times of adversity. Avoidance of accountability, this is pretty huge. Being in a ministerial role, you're really held to a higher standard. And so if you're not willing to hold yourself accountable, and hold your brothers and sisters accountable, this can lead to lots of different frustrations. It can lead to judgment. It can lead to lack of humility and ultimately ripple out and cause more conflict. Inattention to results, this is huge on the mission field because so many things that we do aren't really measurable, and the things that we're striving for are hard to sometimes see in day-to-day life. If we aren't celebrating the little wins, this can ultimately lead to burnout. This can lead to frustrations with team members. And so celebrating those things really creates camaraderie and stirs one another on to continue plodding forward. Looking at Scripture, John 13:35 says, "They will know that you are my disciples by your love for one another." So ultimately, the main thing on the line in this is our witness of Jesus. 1 John 4:20 says, "If anyone says that they love God but hates his brother, he's a liar. Whoever does not love his brother that he sees cannot love God whom he hasn't seen." This is pretty huge, especially in the context of missions. As people are looking on and curious about who we are, if we don't have deep love for one another, we really are hindering our witness. Addressing conflict, this is the acronym VOCAB. It's talking about vulnerability, ownership, communication, acceptance, and boundaries. Starting with vulnerability, this is the willingness to simply be seen. It means making the first move even when you're not the one that you think is wrong. And accepting that nobody is 100% innocent in conflict. Even if 10% of the issue is you and 90% is the other person, you can still be vulnerable and own your part, which moves us to ownership. This is taking accountability for your choices and reflecting and asking how you got to where you are. Then communication, this is asking questions instead of attacking the other person. I've seen this be so effective on the mission field among teams. When you approach things as a question rather than an attack, it really dismantles fear and it causes people to have a softer posture towards you. Acceptance, this is the acceptance of loss of ideals, loss of control, and choosing to speak the truth in love. And then setting boundaries as you learn about one another and learn how people navigate conflict. You can set boundaries such as not raising your voice, not calling names, choosing to listen first, and setting good foundations of trust in further conflicts down the road. Moving on to conflict on the mission field. This is the crux of my life. I work in an unreached context among a small team. And the thing about missions is that you really don't get to pick who you work with, and there is slim pickings, because especially in the unreached world, because there's so few of us. We come from a variety of backgrounds. Some people grew up in church, some people didn't. You have young people, old people, different ideas of how to do ministry, different giftings, people experiencing transition, language learning, loss of family, culture shock, climate changes, small little adjustments to life. And then you add on top of that the partnership with locals, trying to navigate those conflicts. Some teams are big, some teams are small, some teams are focused on a business operation, some are more small-scale church planting. So you've got a wide variety of potentials for conflict, and the number one reason that missionaries leave the field is because of team conflict. So this is absolutely massive on the mission field, and trusting that God is the God of the long haul, continuing to submit ourselves to lives of humility, and seeing other people lay their pride aside for the sake of the team really does stir up that common-mindedness and leads us to want to love one another better too. Moving on to some reflection questions. Number one is, how has conflict enriched your relationships? So for my personal life, I know that watching people leave the field due to conflict on teams has been really difficult and something that really sobers your mind. And so Looking at my team and looking at conflict on our team, I try to see it as an opportunity to have depth and to grow in understanding of one another, and knowing that it's a long haul mission, it's a long haul call, and that these things take time. And it has led to more depth in relationships. And then number 2 is, if there is a conflict in your life right now, how can you practice vocab? So that's the vulnerability, ownership, communication, acceptance, and boundaries model.